gather some information on Nina Turner for my job. I was working on that all night.
Good deal.
How's your child?
Great. So yeah, I had a kid. He's doing fantastic. So I got a little bit of time today. I don't know how long I have. Maybe half hour to an hour.
I have about a half hour left before I have to answer too. So
then I should probably be changing diapers and stuff. But I love it. It's the greatest moment in my life. I couldn't be
I actually don't. Is it a boy or a girl? I never asked.
Boy. His name's Hank. 8 pounds 4 ounces. Yep. Hank Miller Noerr.
Yep. Propane accessories. Is that what we're going for?
See, that's what I was going for, but my wife was going more for, I think, Hank Williams. So.
I've been actually.
If there's other than Hank Aaron, we could compromise on Hank Aaron.
Maybe. You know? I don't know. I'm a huge Hank Hill. Me and my girlfriend, we just spent like the whole weekend together. We were watching Hank Hill throughout the entire weekend. I was just binging Hank Hill. Fucking love it.
Mm-hmm.
So what motivated you to call in today?
So I thought that the last caller, I think, is just hilarious. Now I don't know how much. I'll try my best to not judge you by the ideas of the last caller and see what your opinions are yourself. But I find it the height of irony that we now hear left-wing people that have cheered or ignored violence that has occurred for 4 years since Trump's been in president by left-wingers predominantly now claim that the other side's not worth talking to and they're hypocritical. The truth is, as you know, I think all sides have hypocrites and extremists on them. That's true.
That's what I have.
Yeah, I agree. I unambiguously called out the riots that I saw as they were, even before they were occurring. I did a video in the car like, oh, this looks bad. And if you called out Black Lives Matter, you should be calling out this if it occurs on the right. I've talked about how this argument that, oh, no, it was Antifa is horseshit. The reason that it's horseshit, I'm not even saying, I haven't done enough research. Could there have been some left-wing people or Antifa people? Absolutely.
I mean, I was there, but did I? Right?
Well, I mean, right. Well, I assume you didn't break into the Capitol.
Yeah, I don't think me doing any violence while I was in a Biden hoodie would have ended well for me.
Right. But, you know, the idea that there were people dressed up as Trump supporters that supposedly went in, it could have happened theoretically. But here's the question. Did Trump supporters give Black Lives Matter that benefit of the doubt? When there was a riot, like, say, in Atlanta, did Trump supporters go, now wait, that might not have been Black Lives Matter. That could have been right-wingers dressed up as Black Lives Matter.
I will say, on the left, there were people who was like, actually, I think that's counter Intel Pro right there. That looks like a cop. There was actually a lot of people would post clips online where somebody smashing a thing. It's like, that dude looks really sus. That looks like a cop to me. I actually think that's a plant. That was legitimate dialogue that was going on the left a lot of times.
It's still happening on your chat as I was watching your call. The irony is palpable. It's insane. And we're talking about two types of irony here. One, individual irony. That means what I'm doing, what you're doing, what each person typing does. But the other type of irony that matters is those in positions of power, which you could overwhelmingly see that the people in positions of power of this country had no problem whatsoever or ignored almost totally the riots, the violence that we've seen for the past 4 years if it came from the left. But anytime there's potential right-wing violence or actual right-wing violence, they jump on it like it's the end of the world and then justify their authoritarianism, which they've wanted to accomplish the whole time. So just go ahead. Sorry.
So I wanted to get to an interesting point about this. So I believe violence doesn't just spring out of nowhere, right? Obviously, there's a root cause to violence, right? It might be like, oh, the economy crashed, the people are angry, so they're rioting because they want to get their jobs or something, right? Like that happened in Lebanon, for example, right? Where the economy crashed and they're pissed at the elites because they're corrupt, right? So when I see violence on the street, while it is true that 93% of BLM protests were peaceful, so were probably the vast majority of Trump rallies, for example, right?
Correct.
The vast majority of Biden protests, Biden rallies were also peaceful. For the ones he did have, he didn't do a lot because the campaign said they had concerns about COVID. Bernie rallies, I didn't really ever see any violence there. Now, I would like to point out the point though that a protest is also different than a rally, right? A rally is something you go to say, I support this thing or the change of this thing, and you're going there to support your person. Or a protest is you going out and you're opposing something. And so obviously the environment around what a political rally to support a candidate is, and the environment against there's this injustice against us and we need change are going to be different. The emotions on the ground, the environment on the ground, all of that's going to be different. For example, when you have a lot of these, a lot of the times when you see protests on the right, which are either like a great example would be I don't really know what to call it because it's not a rally. There's not really there's Proud Boys rallies, but there's also Proud Boys counter protests. Those have got violent at a higher rate than Trump rallies because the Proud Boys, in my opinion, from my interactions of them, act kind of like a fight club. So I
Mhm.
would like to say that a rally is also a different thing fundamentally from a protest. Would you agree with me on that?
I do, but I will just say it's sometimes hard to suss out what they are. For example, was the women's march, or was it a rally to have the women's march, or was that a protest?
Um,
Like,
See,
I
that's
can see it could
interesting.
blur a line.
That's
Right,
interesting, right? That actually, what would that be? So I would say there is some blurriness in it, but I
right,
would say that a campaign event where you go where Trump speak is most likely a rally in support of that person, right? Or if you go to a campaign event where I'm going to this Trump campaign event, Trump's going to speak and say why you should vote for him, in comparison to I'm going to this place after for example, police shooting. I oppose what happened. I'm going there to oppose it. That would be like a protest. Campaign rallies, I think, are pretty solidly campaign. Even if there's blurriness in the middle, if you go somewhere where a presidential candidate or the president's speaking and he's doing it to kind of rally everyone in support of him, that sounds like a rally. Now, there's also an element on this one, I would say, where they're protesting the steal, quote unquote. Now, I'm not prepared to have a conversation of whether there was or was not a steal, but the idea
yeah,
was that some
that's fine.
people went because to stop the steal. The idea
Right.
that there was massive voter fraud, the election was fraudulent, for what any number of reasons. It could be Dominion, it could
Yeah.
be whatever, right? Um, so
Yeah,
I
I don't.
think it was.
I'm talking irrelevant of that. Like, I'm not here to talk about whether there was a steal or not. Like,
Yeah.
we can have a discussion another day. Suffice it to say, my problems were with the election before election day, and things like censorship, mass control of the media and the flow of information. I have
Hmm.
not been able to prove, nor, and you had me on your show. I don't talk
Yep.
much about fraud after election day because I can't prove it. It's
Yeah.
irrelevant of what I think happened if I can't prove it. I don't have access to the data, and I totally understand any left winger who would say, "Show me the proof that the election was stolen." Oh, you don't have the proof? Then shut up. Now, there's a question of whether or not they should do audits and things like that, but that's not really what this
Hmm.
conversation's about.
Yeah.
And there is,
Yeah.
I'll tell you this, full on, there are claims that are obvious bullshit that have been pushed by Trump supporters about, you know, that just as soon as I hear them, I'm like, okay, what? Oh,
Hmm.
the Navy SEALs flew into Germany and took over some, server that was in Germany, and it's horseshit.
Yeah.
Why would you believe that? If it regardless of what your political persuasion is, if you, if the other side was saying that, you'd be like, yeah, right,
Yeah. And
sure.
it
I
doesn't
mean,
really.
it could happen, but
I
come
don't
on.
understand it either, because even if I was like, let's say I was on your side, for example, I would hate to be the person who's like, I have concerns about the election fraud, and someone's next to you like, yes, they took over the servers in Germany, and then everybody's gonna look at
Yes.
you like, this is your side, this is what you're for,
Right.
right?
And I said the same thing. Like consider that, like, let's say you were someone that had problems with 9/11, hypothetically. My
Well,
problem with 9/11.
I have a big problem with 9/11. I think most of my chat probably has a problem with what happened at 9/11 too.
Well, I mean, like,
Yeah.
if you thought that the official story was ridiculous,
Oh.
like, my
Oh.
take on it was, like, I had a problem with, well, wait a minute. If planes were able to hit the Pentagon after 3 buildings, what are we doing for national security if a foreign invader wanted to do? Like, who lost their job? What is the plan to make sure this does? By the way, if we allow the Capitol to be overran by some guys in bullhorn outfits, what the fuck's the plan to make sure this shit doesn't happen again?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that was kind of my angle on it. And basically, people were like, oh, here's another guy that thinks the buildings were holograms.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Well,
no, like,
I
what
do
the
think
fuck? It just harms your side to have that bullshit being said.
Of course.
you know?
There was a huge the thing is there was a response and a conversation done after 9/11 about, well, what about security? And that was the creation of the TSA, the Patriot Act, and a lot of
it was a
overreaches
mess,
of American
right.
government. And because we weren't willing to have the discussion of how do we
Exactly.
do this and safely, that led to that. I will agree with you on that.
Totally agree.
So
Yep.
let-
But here's the point. Like, the point that I'm getting to try to suss out, like, you could make a nuanced difference between whether or not this was a rally or it was a protest. The point is, we have seen basically unchecked examples of riots. Again, according to the numbers that even people in your chat were saying, 93% of Black Lives Matter rallies were peaceful. That leaves 7% that weren't. If there were any organization that, like, for example, the Proud Boys, if you'd see over 5% of Proud Boys rallies would result in violence or riots, you would say there's a damn problem. Something's going on here. I would have no problem with people saying that.
Mhm.
So the idea that we're supposed to somehow think, oh, well, it was only 228 different locations. That's just locations, by the way, not actual riots. Because we saw in Portland, we saw riots that occurred over and over. The fact that I'm supposed to be like, well, then no big deal. It's absurd. And to listen to a caller of yours talk about the hypocrisy of the right while he himself literally engages in the very hypocrisy that he's criticizing, where, oh, but when my side did violence, it was okay. That violence was okay.
So,
and so that's the real problem I have with this.
The data you're talking about, I remember this actually came up on last week's show. Someone who said, well, this is actually different locations, not different events. And then they went into the specifics of it. And I remember Sockdem Left saying something about, well, you have to go deeper into the, I'll review that again and try to get back to you if I remember to, but I could have sworn it was actually different dates. It was just a misinterpretation of a certain part of the study. I know the study you're talking about. I'll ask Sockdem Left. I'll actually message him right now about if he has that number on the protests. But besides,
would you deny that we've seen at least, let's just take a very conservative number, we've seen at least 24 riots that have resulted as BLM protests. Is that
peaceful, fair? BLM associated protests? Oh, sure, we can say like a dozen, sure.
Okay, a dozen, even a dozen, let's say that, that's 12. Like, okay. If people make excuses for those 12, and then the first time that there seems to be a right-wing riot or a Trump supporter riot, all of a sudden say this is unacceptable, well, it comes off as incredibly hypocritical. And it's one thing if it's just me or you, who the hell are we? But when it's the vice president, the president of the United States, when it's the Senate leader, when it's Maxine Waters, when it's Nancy Pelosi, when it's the mainstream media, when it's our intel agencies, then it starts to be a problem. Then when you see that, oh, by the way, we're going to crack down and just anyone that's on the right, we're going to say that all these social media platforms have to treat them like they're inciting violence and things like that. It becomes abject nonsense. And so I don't understand if either you're against political violence or you're not. I've been vehement. I could back up my claim. I called out Trump supporters that did this. I said they should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. If they could find who directly led to the killing of this cop, if this is how he died, they should be given the death penalty.
Well, I'm not. I would disagree with that. Actually, I would actually be led. Well, the death penalty. That's a different day, different story.
Right.
Yeah. But so I agree, and I'll just say this flat out that it's bad to burn down your community. Period. It's probably bad. Now, of course, and there's some certain scenarios where like a dictator is taken over and we need to overthrow. Like there's certain scenarios where, of course, like why? Like, but generally it's bad, right? But so I was just putting that out there. So if anybody says, well, if Hitler took over, just to fucking placate them. So the nitpickers, I want to end the violence. Period. Right? That's my thing. As I don't like people having their communities burned down. I don't like people dying. That's bad. My thing is, how do we solve these issues of the violence occurring? And what are the sources of it so we can address them at the source? Because we're constantly like yelling about the violence, talking about the violence, but there's not a lot of like, well, how do we stop the violence? And a lot of people's like, well, lock them up. Well, that doesn't stop people from getting violent. You never have arrested civil disobedience away, right?
$50. Unchecked riots or cultists attacking the Capitol.
Thank you, Miles.
Also, I never defended any violence. Stop lying, Rob.
Miles,
thanks for the talk.
Miles, thanks for the $50. So the thing is, when it comes to BLM, I think the core for them is unaddressed issues that have happened of a failed reconstruction during the 1870s, a wealth gap, problems with policing, and there's a lot of issues that are the sources of that. So anytime these happen, I try to drag the conversation to that. When it comes to what happened in DC with the pipe bombs and the media getting rushed and the people who died and the type of dialogue that went on there, I mean, I don't know if you saw, I was in DC when it happened, man. I was spit at. I was threatened with fucking execution. It was the type of fucking dialogue that was thrown at me from people who came from outside my community. You know, the outside agitators I hear about all the time, right? It was extremely discouraging. Of course, I told them I'd fucking pray for them, and I did my best to engage in the best way possible. But eventually, when they started saying the F slur and charged the media, and I was at the media line, I had to get out of there. And so the center of where I think that comes from, in my opinion, has to do with, of course, I think economic inequality is attributed to the fact that people have grasped onto this movement so desperately. But I think a lot of it has to do with conspiracy peddling and inflammatory rhetoric.
Okay, but I could push back on that as well, right? So I'm not the fact that you went through terrible stuff, I'll take you at your word. That is horrible. Yep. I could put to hundreds of videos online and people that I have personally seen doing things like this, sitting down in Pittsburgh at a cafe for a cup of coffee, where Black Lives Matter comes,
throw a firework at them or something,
starts calling it right, throwing shit at them, hitting them, like shit like that. It happened. It happened on the other side. People didn't want to talk about it. The idea that, well, one side's protesting something that's real and the other side isn't. But that's the reason to decry the tactic as opposed to the motivation, because the truth is all sides are going to think that their they're justified in the actions they're taking. And you want to talk about peddling conspiracy theory nonsense? Like, literally, we had mainstream politicians, academics, media people claiming that Trump was Hitler, all of his supporters were racist, that ICE agents were concentration camps, and they were like Nazi soldiers. So you don't think that that led to some of the violence that we saw? And then in addition, then you have to ask questions of how much of this came from the false narrative of hands up, don't shoot, that we know was a lie, that resulted in actual riots that continue to be pushed over and over, even though witness statements, forensic testimony, and others prove that that wasn't true, that Michael Brown was going for the gun. So the parsing, like, we could get into this conversation of, well, was your side right or was my side right? The problem is we need to end political violence. That's the problem. It is not a justifiable tool. And what I see is one of the biggest contributors to what I see that's happening now is when you had almost the entire establishment, when people couldn't believe what their own eyes were telling them, that we saw riot after riot occurring at Black Lives Matter rallies, and that was made excuses for. We said property destruction isn't violence, or we had Chris Cuomo say, well, where does it say in the Constitution that protests have to be peaceful? You know, that kind of crap. We had Joe Biden, when asked about Antifa, well, it's just an idea, instead of condemning it. We had Kamala Harris bailing out people that were arrested for rioting and burning down a police precinct. When you see that over and over and you're on the other side, eventually extremists on that side are going to say, yes, we want to play this game as well. We'll burn shit down. We'll break into shit. And that's, so when we're talking about how do we stop this, you stop it by criticizing your own side first, which is exactly what I've done, but I don't see a lot of it in the left, particularly when it comes to the leadership of the left.
So, there's a few things I wanted to say, but I kind of lost them along the way. Give me a moment here.
No problem. Oh, yes, I do know Antifa supposedly means anti-fascist. You dumb shits in Dylan's chat.
Okay, here it is. Here
just because you call yourself anti-fascist doesn't mean you are.
So the thing is, if we look at Hong Kong, right, and we look at the riots that happened in Hong Kong, anybody looking on the outside says, how do we end this from going on? Well, the people are outraged at the CCP's encroachment. So obviously, to stop what's going on, we deal with the source of the issue, which is the CCP's encroachment, right? If we look at Lebanon, we see the economic disparity, and we see what's going on there with over 50% of their people needing assistance to just get by due to the corruption and Hezbollah's horrible, a million things I don't have time to get into. The people riot. That happens. This happens in every country in the world when these situations come up. It happened during the civil rights movement. It happened in times of struggle in this country, and anytime there's a unattended social issue, rioting might be one of the outcomes that come from this, right? And so anytime we have that outside perspective, we kind of have the ability to look at, like, well, yeah, the rioting's bad, obviously, but how do we deal with this? We deal with the issues at hand. We can complain all we want about rioting, but that isn't really going to stop the rioting. Anytime, I can't think of any time in history where there was a mass civil disobedience, rioting, and issues from unattended problems, where us saying, well, let's do unity, everybody, stop the rioting, this is bad, has ever stopped it. It's only been a combination of that type of dialogue while also attending to these issues. And so that's... And let's also get around the fact that when we talk about what happened in DC, I also felt the addition of the pipe bombs has changed the dimensions of how I view that event. The fact that bombs were placed in our nation's capital is takes this from a simple riot, right? Which I'll hold the same standard. But I didn't say Antifa was terrorism. I don't say that storming the Capitol was terrorism in isolation. I'll be consistent there. The placing of pipe bombs, that is terrorism. And I think that's why this issue in DC has particularly troubled me in comparison to all the other events of civil disobedience. That's right, what's really getting to me.
But again, we don't even know who as far as I know, we don't know who placed the pipe bombs yet. When they find out, those people, again, deserve the punishment. The fullest extent of the law should never see the light of day again outside of a prison, if not the death penalty. Totally agree with you there. But again, what we're talking about, that could be one or two extremists. This would be the equivalent of saying, let's say hypothetically that this happened, that there was a big rally against Trump and against Republicans, and in that event, the guy that shot Steve Scalise shoots a Republican. Would we then say this is troubling because originally it was just a protest, but now the fact that there was a premeditation attempted murder, now that's suspect of the whole crowd? No, you would say, I'm not going to blame the other people that weren't breaking the law in that crowd for the idea that one lone nutbag went out and shot.
Well, I'm not blaming everybody else in the crowd. I'm blaming the person who did that. But I'm saying it is troubling that this environment where people were storming our nation's capital, where a police officer was beat to death with a fire extinguisher, the media was rushed, their equipment was smashed, and then bombs were planted.
Is that just real quick on that? Because I'm assuming that it is true, but I've also heard them say that he died of natural causes. Now that could mean, well, had a stroke because he was beaten in the head with the fire extinguisher. But I just don't. I'm operating through my argument as if Trump people murdered that guy and they should be charged with the fullest extent.
And even if the cop wasn't single-handedly murdered, the pipe bombs and everything else in and of itself would be that. But I haven't heard of the natural causes thing. I mean,
right. Well, I mean, it's been all over the place. But yeah, okay, the pipe bombs are boring. I don't disagree about that at all. But I don't understand how that directly links to people that even stormed the Capitol.
I can tell you how it directly links to what I'm concerned about, if you want.
Okay.
I'm not directly linking it to anybody who ever voted for Trump. I'm not doing that. Okay. I'm not saying that, Rob, you are the person who you're the person who planted the bomb, Rob. That's what I'm saying. But I do believe that when we have like Rudy Giuliani come out and say trial by combat, like that, those types of words, when a lot of people in that crowd think that there was massive voter fraud, think the election was stolen from them, are here to stop the steal, and have put a lot of their hopes on Mike Pence changing it all. There's a lot of people. I don't believe you were one of them. I never saw that in any of your threads or anything. But there was a lot of people who thought that Mike Pence had the constitutional authority to just pretend that Pennsylvania didn't exist or something. I forget the exact scheme, but the idea was you ignore Pennsylvania and Georgia.
He would have confirmed different electors, I think.
Exactly. Or there was it was something that he was going to overturn. Of course that wasn't going to happen. But
look, if you have a problem with it, then the states deal with it. It is not the vice president's role to that's just horseshit.
Overturn. Imagine if that happened.
And you disagree.
Imagine if that happened in 2000 and the Bill Clinton's vice president came up and was like, nope, Al Gore's president now. Like I agree. You can't 100%. Do that. Yep. So they believe that a lot of them believe Mike Pence was going to save America from, Joe Biden and fucking get Trump, right? They thought the election was stolen from them. They've been pumped full of theories online or in other areas of Dominion voting and conspiracy and fraud. And of course, you know what? I'll listen to cases about voter fraud. There was, and it seems from my perspective that the vast majority of them have failed. You could say that was either done to improper filings or this or that, but they had the opportunity, and the Trump team seemed to have failed in the objective of presenting voter fraud to the public. They have said multiple times in court there wasn't, but they were been pumped full of all these ideas, and then they're told trial by combat on stage by Rudy Giuliani, and then we see this result. And this is also the same person. I mean, Trump has said things like, when the shooting starts, when the looting starts, the shooting starts, right? This type of violent type rhetoric that does concern me, that I think it's not that hard for me to connect the dots here in my mind.
Okay, but so let me push back on this, right? So one, I read, because I heard what you said. First off, Trump specifically himself said that they were going there, it was going to be peaceful. Second, the people that started the violence with Trump still having 20 minutes left in his speech. Third, if you're going to say, well, Trump should be held responsible because of Rudy Giuliani, or Rudy Giuliani should be held responsible. I read the comment. He's talking specifically about combat, as in going into he's saying, we're going to file these court cases. I'll put my reputation on the line with their lawyers. It'll be trial by combat, meaning we're going to duke this out, as if you would say something like, we're going to combat racism and things like that. Now, was this responsible rhetoric? No. I don't think so. I think that Trump and Rudy should have understand, even if they weren't inciting violence, they knew people were pissed, and they knew, I think that they should have came out and made it clear over and over again, this will be peaceful. You will not, if you see someone engaging in violence, point them out, get them out of here, let the police know. They should have done that. And I agree with you. I don't think it's impeachable. I don't think it means that they're directly responsible, but they were negligent. knowing that a situation like that could be fired up. Having said all of that, we've seen this over and over and over again with the left. I could bring up at least a dozen videos of prominent figures on the left, including mainstream politicians such as Nancy Pelosi, Maxine Waters, and others saying, Eric Holder, when they go low, we kick them. We welcome the peaceful protesters that stormed the Capitol under the Kavanaugh year. Storming the Capitol, that's insurrection. Oh, wait, until the Democrats do it
I've
to end the process under Kavanaugh.
About there'll be like somebody who rushes a congressman's office, right? And they'll do a sit-in or something. I don't know if that's really comparable to people busting in the windows of the Capitol while bombs are planted around the city and fucking the media is assaulted and their equipment smashed, and then people end up possibly getting beaten to death by fire extinguisher. I don't think that's really comparable to a sit-in protest.
Okay, it wasn't a sit-in. The difference is this, like you hear this kind of, well, if it was Black Lives Matter that rushed the Capitol, the police would have treated them harshly. Well, a basically commiserate group, at least ideologically aligned with the same political party, and the people protesting Kavanaugh based on the conspiracy theory that he was a gang rapist and was going to bring women into the Handmaid's Tale. What happened was the police basically decided to let them storm the Capitol. If they had formed lines and started using tear gas and fighting back, who knows what could have happened when it came. But instead they just said, we'll let them in, we'll let them chase congressmen into elevators, and then we'll arrest them afterwards. That's what they did. If they would have done the same with these people, who knows how it would have ended. Now, I would have much preferred that the police stopped both groups from getting into the Capitol, would have been my preference on this. But even if you don't like that,
I mean, it just doesn't seem comparable because they were chanting "Hang Mike Pence, my guy." I mean, that seems a little bit different than going in there and yelling. Did you hear what they were
chanting over Kavanaugh?
Were they saying "Hang Kavanaugh, kill him, execute Kavanaugh"?
I don't know that they said those words, but they were saying he was a gang rapist, that he needed to be removed. We had Madonna outside said that many times she's thought about burning down the White House. And then even if you don't want to,
and Madonna's rhetoric's bad, but I don't think.
And then look what the crowd did.
Did they burn down the White House?
No, but they stormed Capitol Hill.
Did anybody die? Was anybody hung? Was there bombs planted?
I don't know if people were harmed. But again, so you're saying because the bomb thing, that's why I'm saying is different than totally just the people storming the Capitol. How about outside D.C., outside the White House? May 31st, that evening. Okay, when they were chanting 31st. Death to Trump outside the White House, right?
Yeah, that's bad.
Okay, was that an insurrection? What did Nancy Pelosi say about that? What did Kamala Harris say about that? Remember Tom Cotton tried to put an article in the New York Times saying, hey, we need to unleash the National Guard.
Yeah.
We can't have the White House being stormed. What was the left wing, the New York Times, what was the left wing politicians' reaction to that? Did they say, absolutely, let's send 15,000
let me give my reaction to it, right? Okay. So I think it's bad when somebody calls for the death of their political opponents. Right? For example, one of the things that made me tweet out, which a lot of people don't know why I took the time to, saw somebody with like an "Execute Hillary" shirt when I was there. It was like 4 years past the election, and some people are still on Hillary Clinton for some fucking reason. And I saw all that type of dialogue, and the difference for me is, right, and the thing that gets me is that dialogue's bad, right? Obviously, I'll condemn it. Anybody who says we should kill Trump or kill any politician, that's bad, right? Again, nitpickers who are going to say, what about Hitler? Well, obviously it's different. Right. The difference in here is when I look at what happened there, it's they'll rush in, they'll yell at politicians, and that's the worst that happened. And I'm not saying it's good to get in someone's face and yell at them, but it's hard for me, like, mentally to, like, hear someone say, well, what about that time they went in an elevator and yelled at a politician during the Brett Kavanaugh era? And I know the exact footage you're talking about. It doesn't seem comparable at all to people doing what just happened, storming the Capitol, breaking in windows, fucking people, like, what was it, 6 are dead? 5 or 6 are dead now? Not to mention, but again, it's hard for me to ever put these on the same level.
So apparently this one cop died because there were a conflict where, I'm going with the official narrative here, where a Trump supporter or a group of Trump supporters hit him with a fire extinguisher. He later died of a stroke as a result of that. So let's assume that's true. So that then paints the entire thing in a different light. So, for example, in D.C., we saw, or outside the White House, we saw that all of these people trying to get into the White House, chanting all sorts of stuff like kill Trump, trying to get in and remove the president of the United States from the White House, they were physically attacking the police. If one of those officers would have died, then now all of a sudden you're saying, oh, Now that was insurrection.
Well,
Before it wasn't insurrection.
Wait. I
but
never
now
said it
it's
was insurrection. I never used the word
Okay,
insurrection.
my bad. But that's how it's being spun by people that are justifying.
I don't know if I would use the word insurrection. I don't know if that's the correct word. I would say that there's people there who is acting, and most certainly in a seditious manner, right? People who are going in there with fucking zip ties, chanting "Hang Mike Pence." It seemed pretty clear what the intention was, right?
Okay,
Busting out windows.
You would say that it would be sedition then.
I would say it, at least in a seditious manner. Once they've gotten into the White, I mean, at least at the very minimum, and that's me trying to be as charitable as physically possible. Now, obviously, if somebody's literally fighting with police to try to rush the White House, right, then that seems pretty seditious as well. I'll say that right now. It's just that the impact of these two events were so different in the amount of lives lost, in the amount of harm that could have been possible when you have the addition of bombs being planted, when you see the how the media was treated, the difference in scale and brutality of these two events make it hard for me to really, take the comparison seriously.
I totally disagree. Again, if the police would have cracked down on what we saw was the Capitol Hill protesters under Kavanaugh, who knows the violence that could have occurred, but they didn't. They allowed them in. The problem, and this is the fundamental problem, you're going to see more riots like this. Right? You're going to see, and I'm going to continue to fight back against more and more right-wing nuts that you see occur.
I'm happy to hear that.
They're going to occur. And you want to know one of the big reasons that they're going to occur is because almost the entire establishment has given total pass to any time there's left-wing violence. And so the right that then we see the mainstream media. If a Trump supporter goes out and punches a Biden supporter, my God, it's horrible political violence. So, if a Biden supporter does it to a Trump supporter, no big deal.
It's bad. I'll say right now, it's bad if somebody punches somebody because they disagree with them, right?
Okay,
obviously, because as somebody who's been in a position where many people could have beat the shit out of me, and some it looked like they were getting close to, it's you put yourself in a vulnerable position when you go to these events as somebody who disagrees with what the vast majority of people there are, and I'll condemn it. And I will condemn it. It's just for me, I do want to get. Fuck it. We're doing. I really hate. I'm actually enjoying this conversation with you because we're doing it in a very productive manner. I hate to cut this short because I have 2 minutes left. So okay. I just want to make my central point. Then you can make your central point. And then we can wrap it up.
Okay.
My main thing here is that I think Trump has acted in an irresponsible manner when it comes to pumping these guys' heads full of ideas that the election was stolen, and even when it was going on. He was talking about, how these people are special and how he still went on about the idea was stolen, even though there was no evidence. And even after this had all occurred, I have yet to see him come out and say, you know what, I thought it was stolen. I thought that there was millions of illegals who voted in last election. I said, it was stolen against me in the Republican primaries 2015. But you know what? It seems I was wrong. We haven't been able to find proof of that. I'm happy that we did an inspection of our democracy. I have yet to see a statement like that. And so even after the events of this, there's still the environment that created the situation still exists, because the conspiracy theories that compelled these people to think that their democracy was under threat. They're under threat by Dominion voting, under threat by the Democrats, under threat by this and that and all of this, who thought they were taking themselves to action by storming the Capitol to save democracy. And the president has yet to act to counteract those messages and has actively hyped them up. Now, if anybody was at all calling for the execution of Trump, that's bad. If anybody was calling to go hurt Donald Trump, that is bad. And I will say that right now. But we also need to remember that I don't think that the scale of the impact of the events you're giving to me right now, it seems so disproportionate when it comes to scale. Now, I'll leave you to be uninterrupted for 2 minutes. And I gotta end straight.
Okay, I'll be as quick as possible. The scale isn't close because when we see the left-wing violence that's been ignored, we see over 57 people have died as a result of the Black Lives Matter movement. We've seen Trump supporters actually, in Portland, targeted and killed for being Trump supporters. We've seen the media forgive this. We've seen Kamala Harris, who's going to be vice president, bail out the people that were rioting and did all these things. We've seen them have an insurrection against the country where they actually had a Chaz zone and were seceding from the country and then killed a young black man. The people that did that secession, that wasn't considered an insurrection. We saw them storm Capitol Hill under the Kavanaugh protesters and be basically welcomed in the door. We saw them go outside the White House and engage in violence and try to get in. They were kept out by a massive police force. All of this stuff was done with people. I don't think people like I'm just going to say it. I don't think many left-wing commentators, including yourself, spoke out as heavily against that as I've spoke out against what I saw as Trump supporters engaged in a riot at Capitol Hill. I feel like that the treatment is obvious, the double standards, and as long as we forgive some sort of political violence, then it's going to encourage political violence inevitably to be on the other side. Dylan, you might not think so. I'll take you at your word. Look at your chat. Trump supporters are fascist. We shouldn't talk to these people. They're racist. Trump's a Nazi. Remember when we were told that the 2016 election was stolen for 4 years? When people told us, like Adam Schiff, that Trump was a Russian plant? That was a lie. These were all lies. I haven't heard Adam Schiff come out and apologize for that. Yet that directly could have inspired people to achieve some of these violent actions we've seen in the riots that occurred all summer. So the idea that Trump, who said this should be peaceful, we're going to charge these people, it was wrong, had to specifically come out and say, no, I was wrong. You never would give that same standard to the other side that literally bailed out rioters. Literally. You could say that Trump inspired whatever. He didn't bail out rioters. That was the left. And so to hear them and people like your caller say that the right wing's being hypocrites is laughable.